Good afternoon, everyone. I am Aubrey Travis. I am the State Director for Right on Crime. Thank you for attending and welcome to Right on Crime's panel discussion on prosecutors as allies for second chances. Before we start, just a reminder that you can ask questions in the Q&A box, which we will answer at the end of this session. And this panel will be recorded and posted on Right on Crime's page after the event ends. Right on Crime's mission is to restore states to the rightful place as the voice of criminal justice policy and promote fighting crime, supporting victims, and protecting taxpayers. Prosecutors are key figures in the criminal justice system, and it is important that prosecutors be advocates for second chances. During April Second Chance Month, we are highlighting the role of state and federal prosecutors in the efforts around criminal justice reform and the promotion of redemption in the justice system. Please join me in welcoming today's panelists, Kate Shanks, the Vice President of Public Affairs at the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, Amy Burke, the head of the Criminal Division in the Office of the Kentucky Attorney General, and Brett Tolman, Director of Prosecutorial Innovation at Right on Crime. We will start with Kate. Kate Shanks is the Vice President of Public Affairs for the Kentucky Chamber. She leads the Chamber's advocacy and communications work. She has been with the Chamber for more than 5 years and focuses her work on energy, environment, small business, and competitiveness issues. She is a lifelong resident of Kentucky and earned both a Bachelor of Science in Natural Resource Conservation and Management and a Master of Public Administration from the University of Kentucky. Prior to joining the Chamber, Kate spent nearly 12 years working for state agencies focused on energy and environmental policy and regulation, and has held multiple positions relating to communications, outreach, policy analysis and design, and legislative affairs. So Kate, like me, is not a prosecutor, but we have worked a lot together on policy and legislation with the General Assembly in Kentucky. So to start, Kate, I'm hoping you can talk a bit about the work the Kentucky Chamber is doing in the General Assembly to promote second chances, specifically some of the bills we've worked on the past few sessions.
Definitely, and thank you so much for including us in the discussion today and for all of your help on policy during legislative sessions. We really appreciate the Right on Crime partnership that we have, and we have so much work to get done. It takes so many of us to do it. I think listening to my bio, it's kind of like, well, what's the energy person doing talking about criminal justice reform? Not an attorney, not a prosecutor, but at the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, we work on so many different issues that you can specialize in one area, but you're going to get pulled in so many others. And here lately, we have been very much involved in criminal justice reform issues, dealing with substance use disorder, helping employers navigate these issues in the workplace, and then also just tackling policy. And how can we have the right policies to ensure that people can re-enter their communities, re-enter the workforce after being formerly incarcerated? So we started working on these issues. I'll kind of go through a little bit of our history of why is the Chamber involved in this. We started working on these issues a few years ago when it was brought to the attention of our then president and CEO, Dave Atkinson, that you really need to look at these issues, criminal justice, because you all are so focused on workforce. We have struggled in Kentucky with workforce participation. It's been a challenge for us relative to other states. At one point, we ranked 47th in the nation. We've been able to climb up from there to 40th. The pandemic has knocked us way back down. At one point we were 50th, now we're back to 47th. So we've really focused a lot of effort on getting people into the workforce, making sure they have proper credentials, making sure that pipeline into the workforce is solid and that we're supporting our employers across the state. We started a workforce center a few years ago to really focus these issues. I work heavily on policy. I do a lot to help our job creators. But if we can't find people to fill the jobs, then our economic growth and our economic, especially recovery from this pandemic, is going to be limited. So we started looking at the criminal justice reform space as a means of tackling workforce. We did a workforce participation study. It's been a few years now. I think that the stats in that study are still relevant though, but we did a study and it looked at why our participation rates were so low. Addiction was a big driver, and also incarceration. And so we started thinking, how do we prepare people who are coming out of incarceration so that they can get back into the workforce? The big policy that we took off with was the felony expungement bill a few years ago. And this was an important piece of legislation that created a pathway for somebody that had a single nonviolent, non-sexual felony to get it expunged so that they could find better work and job opportunities. Having that on your record was a limiting factor. And we recognized that the research suggested to us that after so many years had passed, after somebody had been convicted, fulfilled their sentence, after so many years had passed, the likelihood of somebody reoffending was about the same as somebody offending for the first time. And so we worked on this policy. It was very important because it was very much a landmark piece of legislation for the General Assembly to take up. It was bipartisan. We had support from Democrats and Republicans. And at the time, we had a divided legislature that we worked on it as well. So it really kind of set the stage and set the tone for the work that we would do at the chamber. From there, we have worked on several other policies that are simply about removing barriers that formerly incarcerated individuals face when they're trying to get back into the workforce or to attain a new education level. This past year, we worked on a felony theft threshold bill, raising the felony theft from 500 to 1,000, in trying to control the number of felonies that someone might have on their record that can cause those employment issues and education issues. We also worked on a bill, it didn't pass, but we're going to be interested in this for next year. We worked on legislation that would remove the felony prohibition to accessing Kentucky Educational Excellence scholarships, a great piece of legislation that would help with education attainment levels that we care about at the chamber, but also removing a barrier for somebody who, formerly incarcerated, has a felony, but wants to get back into education and get back into the workforce. We also worked on a bill we were excited about passing, House Bill 497, Representative Kim Moser's bill, that would create an employability certificate for somebody who's incarcerated that participates in education and employment opportunities. And then when they come out of incarceration, they can use that with prospective employers. So it's a lot of our focus on these issues are very much about workforce, education, getting people back into the workforce and recognizing that having good employment can help avoid recidivism. I could probably go on and on, Aubrey. I don't know if you want me to stop, take a break so you can ask some other questions, but that's just a flavor of some of the policies that we've worked on over the past few years.
That was a great overview. And I think that really sets the stage for how we're trying to change policies in Kentucky to support second chances. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is Kentucky Chamber has really developed, especially in the last year, I don't know when you officially launched it, but you've really developed the Kentucky Comeback Program to help connect businesses who want to hire second chance employees with the resources to do so, and hopefully those employees as well. So I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about that program and how else you're working to promote second chance hiring in the state.
Sure. So Kentucky Comeback is this perfect marriage of our policy work and then also our programmatic work that comes from our workforce center. So I kind of laid out for you the policies that we're working on, but over in our Kentucky Chamber Workforce Center, that's where we have a lot of programs and resources for employers that are second chance employers or transformational employers that hire people who are in recovery. We have an entire resource guide that is available to employers so they can see sample policies, best practices. We also have a Who's Hiring campaign. This is something that we started at the beginning of the pandemic for those who had become unemployed because of the pandemic that were looking for work. And we've been able to tag in that database those jobs that are actually available for second chance employment. So that's a really great resource, both from the employer standpoint that they can put their information in there and attract this type of talent, this type of worker to their workforce, but also for the individual that's, how am I going to find a job? I have this, I have a felony on my record or I'm formerly incarcerated. They can find those employers that are willing to hire people and it can make those connections. We also have specialists that work with employers directly. So they'll go out, meet with employers and help them lift up a program. So it's very much a hands-on approach. This is a program that's funded through many grant providers. If you go to our Kentucky Comeback website, you can find more information about who's supporting it. But you'll see on there all the work that we're doing on policy, a lot of communication resources, and then also that programmatic piece that's helping employers. And we're continuing to develop that. One of the things that we're going to be helping with is a new program that we passed, House Bill 7, Recovery Ready Communities, this past session. And so this is where, I get to work on a bill from a policy standpoint, and then my friends at the Workforce Center get to help create this certification program that's going to be really a local focus on recovery ready, making sure communities are supporting those who have substance use disorders, who sometimes are justice involved, and bringing together employers, local governments, different resources. Housing is an important resource for people that people need. So our Workforce Center is going to be working quite a bit on that too. And then the other neat part of Comeback is that it's not just about us. It's about so many people across the state that care about these issues, that want to help participate and advocate for these issues. And so we've formed a network, and we have built up a network of individuals across the state. Perhaps they're people that are formerly incarcerated, perhaps they're people that are in recovery, family members, businesses, different partnership organizations. So when it comes time to advocate, or when it comes time to promote a program like Recovery Ready Communities, or one of our second chance employer programs, we have this built-in support network across the state that we can engage and we can empower to have a voice in these issues. So all of that is wrapped up under our Kentucky Comeback campaign. It's something we launched last July 1st. So we're coming up on a year, really excited about the progress that we've made with our partners, with our funders. And it's only something that's going to grow from here. So you'll continue to see the Kentucky Chamber really having a strong voice from both a policy standpoint and a programmatic standpoint.
Hey, Kate, do you have certain industries that are more likely to participate and that are showing enthusiasm for sort of a second chance approach to this, or are there particular companies? How is it on the ground?
So that's a great question. The restaurant industry is big. Of course, right now I know everybody's following this, that we're having a big issue with workforce. But even before the pandemic and even before the workforce challenges, that is an industry, I think, that has a lot of opportunity. Construction. I have a great construction company that's very much engaged and has also gotten involved with some housing issues. I think honestly, though, you will find in pretty much every sector, manufacturing as well, you will find those employers that are second chance employers. And here's the other thing, you will find employers that are second chance employers, but don't know that they're second chance employers. So, my dad's a small business owner, and he has been a second chance employee. I mean, I remember in the 90s, before there was a name for it. And he actually got involved in a former employee's parole hearing. So this is not new, but we are wanting to support employers with their efforts. And I think there's a lot of employers out there like, oh, I didn't know there was a name, a title given to me for doing this, or that there was a who's hiring campaign that I could engage with. So I think that you'll see there's quite a few employers across the state that are doing it. A few thousand jobs in our Who's Hiring campaign specifically. We have 95,000 jobs in Kentucky that are open, and a few thousand that are available for just significant, that are tagged as second chance. So it's growing, and I think it's one of those things that you're always going to have the early adopters too, or those industries that maybe have done it for longer, and then maybe you start to see it expand.
Kate, I wanted to plug two things really quick. One is if anyone is interested in learning more about this issue, the Kentucky Comeback website is a great resource, and the Kentucky Chamber did recently do a panel with some of the big second chance employers in the state that I believe there is a video link to on that website. The other is Right on Crime has published a resource guide for second chance employers, and hopefully we can send the link out to everyone at some point during this webinar. But both are great resources if you are interested more in that issue. And then as a reminder, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box and we will get to them at the end of this webinar. Okay, next up we have Amy. Amy Burke heads the criminal branch in the Office of the Attorney General. Most recently, Burke served as the chief prosecutor for the Kenton County Attorney's Office, where she specialized in prosecuting cases involving serious injuries to children, dependency, abuse and neglect, domestic violence, and sexual assault. In this position, Burke provided training and legal advice to law enforcement and allied professionals, Cabinet for Health and Family Service workers, and court-appointed special advocates workers. Burke began her legal career as a law clerk at the Kenton County Attorney's Office in 1995 before becoming an assistant Commonwealth's attorney for the 16th Judicial District in Kenton County, where she, sorry, I skipped part of your bio, before becoming an assistant Kenton County attorney a few years later. Burke has also served as an assistant Commonwealth's attorney for the 16th Judicial District in Kenton County, where she prosecuted felony cases ranging from drug crimes and gun violence prosecutions to sexual assaults against children. Burke has mentored young prosecutors throughout her service to the Commonwealth. She has served as faculty at the National Advocacy Center in Columbia, South Carolina, and at the Kentucky Prosecutors Institute. Since 2001, she has also served as an adjunct faculty member at Northern Kentucky University in the Department of Criminal Justice Studies. Burke attended Eastern Kentucky University and the Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University, and she is a native of Grant County. So Amy, to start you off, I was wondering if you could just speak a bit on your career path to becoming the head of the criminal division in the Attorney General's office. Obviously well reflected in your bio, but just kind of how you got on this path and particularly the kind of work you handle on a day-to-day basis with the Attorney General.
Great, thank you, Aubrey. I think it was equal measure luck and right place at right time, and also sharing a passion that General Cameron shares, which is protection of children, protection of our most vulnerable people, and so forth. So I've been a lifelong prosecutor. I'm very dedicated to that. I'm very dedicated to prosecutors coming up behind us. And oftentimes when you are a career prosecutor, there's not many places for you to go towards the later part of your career. You can become a judge, you can, become a defense attorney and defend individuals, maybe go into a private firm, but that's a little out of the ordinary. So this was kind of an unexpected twist where I was able to take this love I have for criminal justice, for other prosecutors and training and providing information to them, and sort of aligned with this love that General Cameron has, which is to protect our most vulnerable citizens here in Kentucky and to really try to move the mark as it relates to child abuse. Unfortunately, Kentucky is usually statistically in the past couple of years, we've been the highest rated state along with Indiana for incidents of child maltreatment. So we're really working hard here, and that is where my heart lies, given my history of prosecution with kids, to kind of help that. And I think that really sort of chance meeting with General Cameron and being able to interview with him and kind of saying, hey, I want prosecutors to have as many resources as they can have to be able to tackle some of these hard problems that we have in our state. And interestingly, while Kate was speaking, it dawned upon me, and one important thing for prosecutors, for me especially, are children. And so a lot of people don't realize too that if you provide second chances to parents and to adults and access to better jobs, then yes, that can be a detriment to continued recidivism. It can help people when they get a good job to maintain the straight and narrow and to conform their conduct and become a good tax-paying citizen. It can also help save children, because a lot of incidences of child maltreatment can be based upon poverty, but you can have parents that are under a tremendous amount of stress due to money concerns, alcohol, drug issues. And when some of those issues kind of come together, it can create a perfect storm for child maltreatment. So this idea about second chances and helping people get a better leg up helps a lot of ways with what we see as a goal here at the Attorney General's office, which is protection of children. And of course, that's our next generation and the generation after that. And so it's very important that we also think about this in terms of what it does to the young people that are coming up behind us.
Thank you. I think that's a great point you just made. So I really appreciate you highlighting that. And it's great for you to be at the table with us today too, because I think too often prosecutors are left out of criminal justice reform discussions. And so it's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to touch on with you is that two of our primary goals in criminal justice policy are upholding public safety and protecting victims, which you have touched on. And that goes hand in hand with finding ways to keep offenders on the right path when they are afforded second chances. So of course, many of the offenders that you see come through the criminal justice system have gone through it more than once, and second chances are not unlimited. With your background as a prosecutor, could you speak to any changes or improvements you have seen take place or would be right for reform in the criminal justice system at the state or local level?
So thank you for that, Aubrey. I do think it is important. And sometimes I think that while there are a lot of people that need to come to the table when we talk about criminal justice reform, prosecutors are extremely important, especially those prosecutors that are actively in courtrooms, in communities, all different kinds of communities, because they truly, truly see what's going on, what people are facing, the types of crimes and so forth. So they are absolutely a necessity to this discussion. So a couple of things here in Kentucky that I wanted to highlight that prosecutors are at the forefront of. One is the Casey's Law program, or Casey's Law. And this is a way to not give a second chance, but well, in some cases give a second chance, but to hopefully divert those people who, because of their drug or alcohol addiction, might become part of the criminal justice system. And this allows their loved ones and families to try to get them into a treatment program in order to avoid them getting caught up in the justice system, or in cases where perhaps there is an arrest, their family or friends will step in to try to get this arranged so that we can again divert people who that have sort of been hijacked from the ills of addiction and maybe get them on the track to where they can start making good decisions, decisions that are not colored by their addictions, and become good, solid, contributing members of society. A lot of county attorneys throughout the state have worked tirelessly to help families, to get people into treatment. A lot of grassroots organizations. I know in Northern Kentucky, we were very fortunate because Charlotte Webbington, Casey's mother, was from that area, but there were a lot of grassroots organizations like Northern Kentucky Hates Heroin and different places who also assisted us, and it was a place to send families to for more information and for help with that. So Casey's Law is incredibly important. Currently, it is being challenged constitutionally. Our office here at the Attorney General, our Solicitor General's office, is working hard to defend Casey's Law, which is incredibly important. And should the finding kind of not go our way and there be some constitutional issue, I am certain that our office again will be involved with the legislature and other shareholders and stakeholders who see the great importance of Casey's Law to go back before the legislature and maybe tinker with or find a way to make that an option, because that's incredibly important to keep people out of the criminal justice system or give them an avenue by which to seek treatment as opposed to punishment. The other thing that is really interesting that county and Commonwealth attorneys in Kentucky have in place is called the Rocket Docket. It's kind of the same idea. It is taking these cases which directly deal with drug possession or are kind of the types of cases that are driven by drug use. So a lot of your thefts, bad checks, some of these kinds of criminal activities that people will engage in order to support their habit. The Rocket Docket will allow to move those cases through the system more swiftly, and more importantly, to get those folks access to treatment. And pretty much all our prosecutors around the state have bought into that program. They, through the reports to the legislature, they have shown where that program has saved taxpayer dollars and also served this other added benefit of, helping get people off of drugs, getting them hooked up with treatment in the hopes that they can get themselves on a path to having a happier life, being a more productive member of our society, which in turn will give them access to better jobs, better living conditions, and so forth and so on. So those are a couple of things, that are going on with prosecutors right now as it relates to criminal justice reform. I can't think of anything specific about all sort of the movements out there other than General Daniel Cameron in our office see ourselves as conveners, General Cameron specifically. So when there is a need, if there is an issue that's brought up, if there isn't a discussion, we want to help bring prosecutors to that table and other stakeholders. And we're always willing to have those discussions and those talks, even in circumstances where it can be hard. Because again, prosecutors very much also need to be here to protect members of the public, our crime victims. That's incredibly important to every prosecutor I've ever known. So sometimes these discussions are hard. They're difficult, but they are so worthwhile. And so here at the Attorney General's office, we want to be a part of bringing folks together to try to tackle these issues to the betterment of our entire Commonwealth.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I can attest to the fact that you all are always happy to bring people together to have those discussions. So thank you for your willingness to do so. Finally, we have Brett Tolman. Brett is Right on Crime's own Director of Prosecutorial Innovation, and he is a former U.S. Attorney for the District of Utah. Prior to his time as U.S. Attorney, Tolman worked as counsel in the Senate Judiciary Committee under two different committee chairmen. Tolman is a graduate of BYU and the J. Reuben Clark Law School. So Brett, I was wondering if you could speak some on your background as a federal prosecutor and your time in DC and how you came to see the important role prosecutors play in improving our criminal justice system at a federal and state level.
Sure. Thanks, Aubrey. Very happy to be with Amy and Kate and to engage on this issue that certainly is a passion of mine. Now looking back, I've been involved working in the criminal justice system for 25 years now. And I started out, and I'm very proud of the work. I spent 10 years in the trenches as a prosecutor and prosecuted many cases that I'm very proud of. The kidnapper of Elizabeth Spart, Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee, I prosecuted them. I'm very proud to have put Brian David Mitchell, helped to put him behind bars for the rest of his life. I think he's someone that there's really little ability to rehabilitate. And that's the challenge that a prosecutor has, is this constant battle of, protecting the community and protecting victims of crime, while at the same time trying to not prosecute the same people over and over again. I look back on my career and there's a plaque in the Department of Justice that outlines the threefold mission of a prosecutor. And I won't put Amy on the spot, but I'm sure most offices have the same thing or similar. And the two that the prosecutors seem to always settle on is punishment and deterrence. It's very, very much the focus of your day in and day out life. I remember receiving an award for prosecuting just the sheer number of cases, felonies that I did. And I received an award from several law enforcement agencies on securing long sentences. So punishment and deterrence are a real focus as a prosecutor. And it still exists today. But the third fold mission is rehabilitation. And there's very few prosecutors that engage. In fact, my first boss as a prosecutor said, look, your job is to just put bad guys in jail. You're not a social worker. Let somebody else worry about that side of the criminal justice system. And while that sounded good, and to a young prosecutor that wanted to be tough on crime, that made perfect sense. But in the years after being a prosecutor and seeing the criminal justice system and some of the issues in the criminal justice system, I quickly settled on the fact that that was just wrong. I mean, everything about it was wrong. Because prosecutors, if they'll start to engage on the criminal justice reform area, if they'll start to engage in how to help or assist individuals in their communities to avoid being prosecuted, or if they get prosecuted, to not be prosecuted again, to get back into the community. And data has clearly shown in multiple states, as I work across the country, we see in states where they will look and analyze the data, they see that an individual with a job is going to be far less likely to commit another crime. Over 90% of all those who get prosecuted are getting out. So I routinely have this discussion. How do you want them? What shape do you want them in when they get out? And the response is interesting. So for decades, the criminal justice reform has been seen as the soft on crime. You know, progressives, liberals have embraced it, socialists have embraced it, and that's just wrong. Because criminal justice reform is about changing elements of the system, but also it's making an impact so you reduce crime and you reduce recidivism. So that resonated as a conservative and as a God-fearing man, it resonated with me that we should take a different look and a closer look. So I take Aubrey, all of my experience as a prosecutor, my experience as a defense attorney, my experience of being in the legislature and watching criminal law passed. And I've concluded one thing that's been missing, and that is from the discussion, what's been missing are prosecutors' ideas on how to reduce recidivism and how to reduce the crime rate. They're very good at weighing in against a policy that might limit their power. And, you know, for example, and I can go state by state that I've worked in. If you wanted to pass a modest reform, I've had prosecutors tell me, well, I don't really object to this particular reform, but if we give in now, what are they going to ask for next? And that to me is scary, because what's been missing is that authentic approach from prosecutors to look at a problem and say, I have some ideas of some solutions, instead of just, I'm going to resist any possible solution. Most states right now are suffering an over-incarceration problem. This over-incarceration problem comes as the result of legislators passing many, many laws to show that they're tough on crime, expanding the length of time out of fear rather than analysis of the data, and then warehousing those individuals, believing that punishment, longer punishment, translates into lower crime rates. Data suggests that's false. And so I'm encouraged that there are prosecutors, Amy's one, others across this country, who are starting to really engage in meaningful discussion, saying, I don't want to compromise public safety, but at the same time, if I'm not at the table, I don't have a voice at affecting what might actually work. And you look at the areas prosecutors have been helpful: bail reform discussions, decriminalization, addressing over-incarceration issues, pretrial diversions, post-sentencing diversions. There are prosecutors right now that I've just been blown away with. They are working with their community leaders. They're working hand in hand with advocates and defense attorneys. And that's the voice I want to bring, and to bring more of them to the table, and bring conservatives and let them know, hey, this is an area where you can make a difference. Because publicly, a prosecutor might tell you that things are going well and that they exercise good judgment with the power that they have. But when you talk to them and ask them, what areas of the criminal justice system do you think need fixing, you'll start to hear meaningful analysis. So we need to open that up and provide that opportunity for them to engage.
That and the ability to engage. One thing that we really engaged on this session in Kentucky was increasing the felony theft threshold, which Kate touched on at the beginning of this panel. That was House Bill 126. And we have an op-ed on that I'm hoping the link can be sent out to everyone to read that gives background on the law. But I was wondering if you could just speak in general on some of the big criminal justice reform victories you've seen recently and what you see being on the horizon, both federally and at state level, particularly how those changes will affect second chances.
Great question. There are certainly, we all can look back over the last few years and we see, for example, the First Step Act that passed federally, and that was built on several, modest reforms that were started in Texas and Georgia, all across the country, actually, and sort of put together. In its entirety, it is very modest. And I will tell you that we tout it as this large, incredible criminal justice reform package. And I think it was modest and almost embarrassingly so. We didn't address some of the big issues that are out there. There are thousands of statutes, for example, that we don't know what the mens rea requirement is. And we didn't even address that. There are statutes that are duplicative. There are statutes, for example, that the punishment has, is out of whack with what the data now shows for reducing recidivism. So in each state that I've worked in, you see that there are many that have taken pieces of some of what happened in the First Step Act. That's not to suggest that the feds, were the trailblazers. They have been in some instances, but remarkably, the states are far more ahead, I think, than the feds on a lot of areas. In Mississippi recently, just a few days ago, and after meetings with the governor, we're very happy with the fact that there was a modest expansion of those that can be considered for parole. Now, that's a real win, because for me, even though it was opposed by prosecutors, you get them aside and they're talking, accurately. They understand they have an over-incarceration problem. And one of the easiest ways to address that is to have a larger cross-section of the population that's incarcerated be eligible for parole. That doesn't mean you're just letting people out, but it is giving you the ability to control your own destiny. So measures like that are important. Expanding the threshold for the felony theft, that seems a no-brainer, because as costs have increased, as theft has increased, but even those modest changes are sometimes very difficult. We've had pushback in some states on shackling of pregnant mothers, and there's a dignity side and a humanity side where prosecutors don't have to feel like they're compromising public safety in order to pass some, modest reforms. The sentencing reforms that are out there need to be addressed in every state. And it's difficult to do so when you have had the pandemic and then you see a rise in certain crimes in certain areas and you get the public that starts to feel uneasy. So it's going to take courage, but it's also going to take careful, tying it to data and to studies. And if you do that, then you start to see you're not going to compromise public safety. And that's really what a prosecutor is mindful of, and it should be what we're all mindful of. But Aubrey, I have made a commitment over the last decade to folks that I prosecuted and to some folks that I've represented as a defense attorney. I've indicated, hey, when you are looking for a job, when you get out of prison, if you're looking for a job, I would love to help you. And I've made that offer, but have not had, very many take me up on it. But I've been surprised at how many have reached out. And most recently, I had one where he was in an association that was going to kick him out because he had a felony. And yet he didn't serve any time. He got probation. He was a very low level in a drug conspiracy. So I got to call his, association. I've done it for employers. I even did it for one guy that was afraid his church was going to kick him out, and called and made let them know, hey, I was the prosecutor on the case, or this is my background, and this person really, is worth taking a chance on. That I wish I could do more of that, but I think prosecutors have too often felt like their only role is like a surgeon. They go in, they operate, they excise, something that's problematic, and then they're done with the case. If we start to see ourselves as affecting policy or as affecting the ability of even just an individual to get a job, we're going to see a much different approach by prosecutors to affect the criminal justice system.
Thank you, Brett. I will remind everyone one more time, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. We do have one question, and this will be probably the most for Amy to answer, but maybe Brett could touch on it a bit too. The question is, second chances are not available to those rehabilitated and eligible, but not released by the Kentucky Parole Board. And prosecutors play a role in support of such individuals. So Amy, maybe if you could touch a bit on how prosecutors can be supportive of these individuals in the Kentucky system. And then Brett, just at the federal level, how prosecutors, I think you've touched on this a bit in what you were just talking about, but prosecutors can play a role kind of after the fact in prosecutions.
So honestly, prosecutors are not involved in the parole board decisions. Honestly, the only time where we're sometimes involved is when a victim or someone that we prosecuted on a very violent crime, murders, things like that, are going to be released, or a sexual assault crime. And I personally have gone down with victims and their families to the parole board and been a support to them while they speak. If you ask prosecutors, it seems like a lot of people have access to parole. And at least in Kentucky, it seems like there has been a movement to offer diversion, which a lot of prosecutors go along with, and to offer probation, maybe in cases where traditionally we would ask for jail time. Eligibility for parole is more of a legislative a topic. Right now for nonviolent offenses, parole is about 20% of the time, as well as good time credits and other things that the Department of Corrections is in charge of. And for violent offenses, it's 85%. I can tell you that a lot of times what is charged as a violent offense is not pled out to that. This is a hard one when it comes to parole because, again, prosecutors are there to protect the public. And also we have a lot of involvement with the victims on these violent crimes. The 85% serve out. So for instance, if you're given a 10-year sentence, you've got to serve about eight and a half years of that. We don't really have mandatory minimums here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So I do know that there has been a sharp increase in the number of parole eligibilities, the use of halfway houses, the use of treatment in lieu of sending someone on to prison. In my experience, several opportunities on diversion, several opportunities on probation. So I think prosecutors could be in support of this, but again, it's a tough conversation, and they would need to really be welcomed into it to be a part of it. And I think before they could get behind it completely, they would have to be very clear on what the rules are, what the parole board looks at, what the histories are. But it's not something traditionally that prosecutors have any role in whatsoever. But there probably are cases where if someone has gone to prison, where they have made decisive moves to better themselves, whether it be through education credits or different things they can get involved in, demonstrated a plan of action whether it be for treatment or other things in betterment of their situation, then I would think that prosecutors, if contacted, might be in a position to advocate for that. I guess what I'll say is this: prosecutors oftentimes are the people that see the most sort of waste of potential in the criminal justice system, meaning we see the points at which people's decisions lead them in the wrong way. We also see some very redeeming qualities, whether it be a strong family support, whether it be a wonderful child or children or a spouse, or we might see that they have a gift for music or a gift for athleticism or something. And often prosecutors will get very depressed and will often talk about, wow, what is it that this young person or this older person, more so with young people, will say, gosh, this kid had their whole life in front of them. They had all this benefit going. What in the world? And that level of kind of seeing sort of people make bad decisions that we know are going to follow and affect them for the rest of their lives is a very depressing thing. So I think that if prosecutors are made a part of that, I think they would take that very seriously, because again, we want people to do better. Sometimes that's the only bright light that we as prosecutors get to see when we're involved in things like drug court initiatives or veterans court, or we're in the family courts where we see families reunited and successfully complete plans. Those are some of the only bright opportunities that prosecutors see, that we think this is really great. We're a part of something really good. Someone has made these changes. Someone has improved themselves. And usually prosecutors are very happy to see that change and happy to see those good things occur. So I do think that if brought to the table under the right circumstances, prosecutors would be open to that. All we want is for people to be productive members of society and to not harm other people, not victimize other individuals, is kind of what we want to see happen. You know, put us out of a job, so to speak.
Thank you, Amy. That's a really helpful answer, and you taught me a lot in that answer. So hopefully you taught our viewers some things too. I didn't know that's how it all worked. So I appreciate your very thorough answer. Brett, I'm going to give one to you. This was asked Texas specific, as we are the Texas Public Policy Foundation, but I think you can probably answer it in terms of best practices. One of our viewers is really interested in deferred sentencing alternative courts for first time and low impact offenses in rural Texas counties. So Brett, if you want to take that one. Amy, you might be able to touch on it a bit if there are any similarities in Kentucky, but I'll let Brett start on that one.
Sure, thank you. I will tell you that having listened to Amy, I'll say that I think she's in the top of her class. I think that prosecutors, I love to hear them getting engaged and seeing the human side of the individuals that they prosecute. And I think a lot of times the state system can produce, really thoughtful prosecutors. So that was enlightening, Amy, and I give you a lot of credit for that. I wish that was more the norm. There was an earlier question about prosecutorial misconduct, and I won't belabor it, but there's very little accountability for prosecutors that is really outside of an internal review, an ethics review. Some states don't allow prosecutors to be disciplined by state bars. Federal prosecutors are not subject to the discipline of state bars. There's very little remedy outside of excluding evidence for when there's misconduct. So I wrote an article in the Louisville Law Review last year, and I'm not trying to plug this. It's not fantastic writing, but it outlines several cases where there is subtle and then not so subtle prosecutorial misconduct, and perhaps that might be of interest for folks to read. Getting to the question on best practices and deferred sentencing, I was once very inspired by a police officer, and I believe he was in the St. Louis area many years ago. He a pilot program, just kind of him and a prosecutor decided they really felt there were some good kids that were getting prosecuted, and they'd get these kind of longer sentences when they really didn't have very many prior convictions or trouble, and that they had a whole, that they had a support group. And so they did something very unique. They would build the case up against and say it's drug, and they would do a controlled buy, and they would build that case and put the charging document together, the indictment or the information or the complaint. And then they would put some of the evidence and pictures, and they would put it in a file, and they would ask to meet with the target and his family. And they would present what they were about to charge him, unless he and the family decided they were going to go a different direction. He said usually it was the mother or the father that was very instrumental, but almost in every instance they had a change of heart. The individual didn't want to get prosecuted. They felt like they were given a second chance even before. It really taught me about the power of deferred sentencing, and I think there's more that needs to be done. But there are areas across the country where they are doing things to incentivize on the front end individuals, and that's really the best practice, is to incentivize. And it even works when you're incarcerated, and it works when you're on supervision after you get out, is to incentivize so that they have less risk, less exposure, more ability to affect their outcome. They're given a chance, and they're seen as someone that can actually be successful. There's a lot of value to that, and many states are starting to discover that.
Thank you, Brett. I think that's probably a good note to end on, as we are getting close to the end of our time. And I think that really highlights the importance of second chances and the roles that prosecutors play. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us today, especially our panelists, Kate, Amy, and Brett. Prosecutors are key figures in the criminal justice system, and it remains important that prosecutors be advocates for second chances. As we wrap up April's Second Chance Month, this panel has given us a great overview of the role the legislature and prosecutors play in the criminal justice system and second chances in Kentucky, and have given us some great ideas for moving forward in 2021 and 2022. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today.
Thank you all.
Thank you.